Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Wicklund, and welcome to Energy Espresso. We are at the Baker Hughes Annual Meeting in Florence, Italy. Nice place to have to hang out for a couple of days. And today we're talking about the maritime industry. I have three fabulous guests. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we're going to quiz them and learn a little bit about the maritime industry and specifically where Baker is playing in this particular spot. Speaking of Baker, Raimondo, I'll let you go first.
Morning, Jim. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here, first of all. My name is Raimondo Giavi. I'm Vice President of Hydrogen and its derivatives for Baker Hughes. So my job is to grow the hydrogen business and everything around its derivatives. Okay,
fuel. Okay. Carlos?
Hi, my name is Carlo Luzzatto. I'm the CEO of RINA. RINA is a knowledge company active in engineering consultancy and testing, inspection and certification. Very glad to be here.
Claire?
And finally, I'm Claire Wright. I'm SVP of Hanwha Ocean Europe. Hanwha is the 7th biggest conglomerate in Korea. And in this context, we're very big in shipbuilding, retrofitting, new technology deployment in the marine spaces.
So we got bases covered on fuel, on inspection and certifications, and construction. So this will be interesting. The maritime business is fascinating to me. I read that 80% of all goods are shipped that way. It's only 3% of global emissions. So they already look efficient in terms of tonnage. But as we are all being affected by regulations and deregulations these days, I don't know much about regulations in that business. Carlos, tell us about what deregulation and regulation and the legal framework, what's going on in the maritime business that affects us today?
Sure. So as you said, Jim, shipping is probably the most global industry on the planet, right? And it does, seaborne, it's, covers 85% of every good that is exchanged in the world, and it's responsible, like you said, for approximately 3% of the greenhouse effect gases. So regulation is very important. In a global business, you should have, a level playing field, same regulation across the board. This is not the case, actually. And as you know, regulation drives, a lot of the rest.
Everything, yes.
Absolutely, including, and we talk a lot in this couple of days here at Baker Hughes, technology, right? And it includes where you're investing in technology. It includes where ship owners are going to invest. Depends on regulations. And we live in a world in which this is not happening in the right way. So we've got rules in Europe that, as probably everybody knows, a couple of years ago, the ETS kicked in, in Europe. Mm-hmm. And gradually, and the end of the story, so the full enforcement will be, by the end of this year. While on a global regulation, the IMO has not, decided in the same way yet. And by the way, Europe has already made it clear that should the IMO take the final decisions on regulation, the regulations already in place in Europe would adjust, and in the spirit of having the same rules everywhere. And of course, if you don't have that, what happens is that you are kind of forcing the routes to take into account if you've got any kind of penalty, if you are not at the level of emission that you need to do. And so you're kind of impacting a lot the routes and the goods, and penalizing ports as well. So it's not only...
You have so many masters. I mean, like you say, the ports, the regulations, the countries, the continents, it's got to be exceptionally complex navigating all that.
Yeah, I think what everybody's trying to figure out here is what will be, the end game. Let's assume that there's going to be some sort of agreement. It has just been delayed, at least by 1 year now. But let's get past that point. There is going to be an agreement. So let's be positive on that side,
Okay.
right? Still, and we'll talk about fuels, we'll talk about a lot of other aspects. Will still be a scenario in which this will be completely global, and any operator will be free floating, in any port of the world and so on? Probably not. We believe that there's going to be a sort of a clustering, of the shipping industry that is going to be depending on a lot of things, but including limits, constraints that are coming from regulations, including technologies, including multi-fuels.
So the clustering is going to be based on things other than geography?
Yeah, but it's going to be, of course, influenced by, the infrastructure onshore as well, the ports, the bunkering opportunities, and all of that.
May I
Absolutely.
perhaps, add to that? I think one thing to bear in mind is obviously the IMO is our global regulator, and from a safety perspective, it's done a phenomenal job in making our industry as safe as it is. The global regime related to the net zero framework, and we do have to remember the ambition for 2050 remains. The challenge that the IMO has right now is agreeing the pathway to get to that net zero ambition. So when we're thinking about the long term, as Carlo says, we still need to think about the fact that that framework is still there and that ambition is still there. From an operational perspective, managing different global regimes, and we start to see a proliferation of different regimes, it's very challenging. But for example, what the EU can do, particularly backed up with innovation funding, is it can be a test bed for new technology, and it can enable the development of new technology to a commercializable frame.
Okay.
And then, therefore, that technology is then ready to deploy globally when the regulatory framework is supportive of that.
Okay. I have noticed that in the U.S. and in parts of Europe, the 2050 goal of net zero is kind of fading under the reality of practical money and making a profit. Do you expect, and I'm going to ask you on this, Raimondo, do you expect that the goal, Claire's point, the goal of net zero by 2050, do you think it'll stay in force? I want to ask you next year if you think we can make it, but do you think it will stay in force? Because if they relax the goals, this is an industry that wants to make money, so won't they go back to trying to make as much money as they can if that regulation, if that overarching goal is no longer there?
Yeah, so you put many different things on the table, so I'm going to try to break down
Good.
what is a very complex problem.
Yes.
What has been said, and I totally agree, is that regulation is trying to find the right framework, but there's still a little bit, there's still variability in there.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of finding solution for the future, and especially for to do a appropriate capital allocation, an efficient capital allocation, having clarity is very important.
Absolutely.
But we know it's going to take some time. So the approach that we see to that is to take a approach, and we like to look at a portfolio approach that gives flexibility. Flexibility means that no matter what happens, no matter the direction it's going to take, we have the ability to adapt. So the way that we do it in Baker Hughes is, again, go back to portfolio. So we look at our technologies, and we make sure that those technologies are flexible and adaptable. To make a simple example, which fits the discussion that we are having with our partners, our gas turbines will be able to run with any type of low carbon fuel, and even with natural gas or other stuff. So by doing so, you give the opportunity to adapt to whatever the fuel of the future will be, and probably there's going to be more fuels. There are some complexities with that, as we're probably going to touch upon, but we might have scenarios where we have multiple fuels. To go back to your original point, the financial sustainability is fundamental.
Yeah.
We have learned in the past few years that markets don't carry premiums just because it's green.
Right.
They carry premiums if those are imposed. So our job is to figure out what is the most effective pathway to decarbonization, help the policymakers to take the right decisions. So we do a lot of that, roundtables with policymakers, and keep in the portfolio the flexibility that gives us the possibility to adjust to maintain a profitable business.
Claire, your Hanwha builds and designs. How do you stay flexible going forward from here without taking the risk of losing money? We were talking about engineers come up with great ideas, but you have to find a way to make money with them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So part of it is around, obviously there's a portfolio of technologies that we're developing, from the ammonia gas turbine engine to electrification, and fundamentals of energy saving technologies. And really it's about scheduling the timing of the development of those to the point at which the regulatory environment and the commercial environment will enable their deployment. So when I'm talking to owners, the fundamental is energy efficiency, because it's quite straightforward to, based on your operational profile, to understand the return on investment of a particular energy efficient technology, whether that's air lubrication, rotor sails, or something as simple as LED lighting. And all of these can be from new build or from retrofit. And I think Raimondo hit the word on the head, which is flexibility. It's enabling an owner to make choices today that don't close doors to something in the future, but also don't add a significant capex premium today. Because obviously a ship owner is investing for 25, 30 years in a very competitive environment, and therefore they need it to be an effective ship today, but also there's the question of the residual value risk they're taking on by not having that flexibility. So a lot of the things that we're looking at are, can you calculate the return on investment today? Energy efficiency, you absolutely can. If you're making a dual fuel choice, then you're bringing in optionality. You have the optionality to use whichever fuels as they're available. The ammonia gas turbine has the benefit of being able to blend. So the owner can blend based on the availability of fuels at whichever ports they're going to, but also they can blend to compliance. And I think that's critical to the economic viability from an owner's perspective of an investment, is can they blend to what they, either based on their customer profile, because there is still customer pull in some segments, particularly containers, or is it to what the regulation requires? And our job as Hanwha is to enable them to make those decisions. But you're right, the R&D kind of time horizon, we have to be aware of all of those things, and it will probably go at different paces in different segments.
And Jim, if I can add one point on what Claire just said, if you look at the order book today of the new vessels, there's a lot of that already embedded. A lot of the investments, and big investments, right? We're talking about vessels that cost hundreds of millions each, are ready in terms of dual fuels already. Okay, that has a lot to do with being able to be flexible and to put on the ship, on the vessel at a certain point, a different technology, and the vessel is ready for that. So a big part of the order book, and more I think we should see this, will be ready for the alternative
options. Let me ask this, which is great. Being flexible is key. I'm a big fan of adaptability in just about everything. I also look at density of energy. And, in the U.S., we've been having the rolling gunfight of, solar, wind, or hydrocarbons, coal, which is getting phased out quickly. But energy density doesn't matter if I'm sitting on the ground somewhere. But if I'm at sea, the less energy density I'm using, the more room it takes, the less room I have for cargo. Are there some technologies that just won't work? Not that I'm planning on a solar-powered container ship anytime soon, but are there any technologies that limitation marks out?
I think it depends on the trading pattern of that particular vessel. So electrification and batteries have great potential on very short sea routes, and particularly inland routes, but they won't work in deep sea because of, exactly as you say, that compromise between cargo space and the power, the propulsion system. Deep sea will always require some kind, or certainly within the time horizon, I can see some
the highest density,
a high density or the highest density liquid fuel. But you're right, there could, in using something like ammonia, unless you can make the engine package smaller, which in the gas turbine space it is smaller, and therefore you can use that space for the fuel. But otherwise, you are going to end up compromising essentially on the distance that the vessel can trade between bunkering. And that's why the fundamental decision of any owner in making any investment is how energy efficient can you make that vessel? Because the fuel you don't burn is fuel you don't pay for, whether that's a conventional fuel or a new fuel. And obviously, if you have a really, really energy efficient ship, then that lower density fuel, you're going to require less of it than you would do otherwise if you hadn't thought about that first. So when we're thinking about new technology development, efficiency absolutely comes first, and then the propulsion thereafter.
Okay. I was in Norway and years ago, and last year, and took one of the electric ferries, and they're very pleasant. They just can't carry much other than people. Raimondo, the question, your fuel, your hydrogen, Baker Hughes is fairly new to all of this. One of the things you bring are energy technologies. So in the context of our discussion, where does Baker fit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look a little bit at the history, regulation. So whenever you have new regulation, especially around emissions, it drives, it creates a window of opportunity for new technology to come in. So this is exactly the case here. Exactly as it was the case in the automotive industry 30 years ago. The introduction of emission regulations and the stringent of emission regulation drove new technologies and newcomers that could pack their technology into a car. So we see exactly the same way. We're excited about the gas turbine technology because of the packaging. So real estate is very valuable on a ship, is very limited. So gas turbine, they bring a very high energy density, higher than the incumbent internal combustion engine. We started to basically discuss with Hanwha a few years ago. Our relationship started prior to this project. How can we together look at tackling this problem of decarbonization? And that's when we started basically to work on the concept of a gas turbine on a ship, which, by the way, it's not unheard. It is used, has been used for decades, especially in military applications. So it's not a newcomer.
Military, okay.
Military applications. So we are basically looking at translating that, adding the efficiency angle, which is very relevant, and we have the most efficient machines in the world, so it fits very well that application, and adding the flexibility angle and making sure that you can use basically any possible fuel that you can use on a ship. That's how we started, and we're driving the project to conclusion in the next couple of years, and we'll have the first ship probably, hopefully sailing before 2030.
Oh, that's cool.
Hopefully so, yeah.
The emergence of gas turbines has been nothing short of becoming a rock star here in the last couple of years. And y'all do a very good job of that. I remember 5 years ago, if you said gas turbine to somebody, they'd go, excuse me? And today it's like finding an old classic car in a garage that's never been touched. A friend of mine called the other day and said, I've got some gas turbines. What should I do with them? Give them to me. He didn't agree.
And I think Raimondo makes the good point of that we're building on infrastructure and technology that already exists.
Yeah.
And one of the big challenges in deploying new technology in shipping is the perception of risk. And so if we're building on a technology that already exists, you start to take some of that risk profile out. Because when I talk to people, they say, oh, why can't you just put this technology on the vessel? You know, we can just drive an electric car. And I say, yeah, but if you're driving an electric car and you break down, you just pull to the side of the road and you call the rescue services. Yeah. If a ship breaks down at sea, if the crew don't rescue it, then they're dead. And that's the fundamental difference. We have to make sure what we deploy is safe. And that's the benefit of the gas turbine, is the fact that it's an established technology that we're just repurposing for marine application.
I think that's a key point, right? I mean, gas turbines have been developing from a technological standpoint in the last 30 years, basically. And are part of a kind of energy, cleaner energy in the power generation sector first. And these technologies have been applied all the way from 300 megawatt turbines, in combined cycle that produce thousands of megawatts, as well as in aero engines.
Yeah.
Remember, at the end, the aero engines, basically, they are, gas turbines.
That's what it is.
So the core is there. So the technology that is being used now, and we are helping, doing the maritimization, the plan approval for the turbines that Raimondo was talking about. But the core of these technologies, and some of those also is technologies that were developed, in Hanwha in a specific, field, have been, are absolutely proven. And so that's a key message. I think Claire just said it, is a key message. We're not testing new core technology on,
not a warp
on
engine just
combustion
yet.
and so on. And so, and even as we speak, outside the maritime sector, it's, you know, the blending of fuels,
Yes.
you know, in the gas turbines.
That's changed dramatically in the last couple of years.
Absolutely. And so we are all going to benefit from that. But that said, you know, again, the energy efficiency is key, and that's why these turbines have a great potential of being a viable solution also from an economical standpoint. And this will be developed fast.
That means your certification work doesn't have to be reinvented.
Right, no. And you know, RINA, basically what RINA is kind of, from this standpoint, a kind of a third party, right? We are not pushing, you know, any kind of specific technology, right? We see all the technologies. We come with a DNA of being, you know, a TIC player, you know, an inspection, and we are, a lot of our business on that side is, you know, it's accredited. So, you know, but at the same time, you know, on the engineering side, a lot of our business is helping, you know, introducing
advisory work.
Exactly, advisory, engineering, and so on. And so putting together these elements, usually what we do is helping, you know, speeding up certain introductions. Like in this case, I think the novel LT16 is a clear example of a great opportunity that can be going on ship pretty fast.
Do that again? The what?
The 16. It's our small industrial gas turbine,
Thank you.
which is the one that we are now working with Hanwha to put on the ship, and with RINA to certify for the maritime world. It's one thing I would like quickly to add, because most people, you ask about Baker Hughes, when you see Baker Hughes, you think about oil and gas. That's our DNA. However,
I think of power now. That's
priceless, perfect. So we have developed into industrial, but there is a characteristics of our DNA in oil and gas, which I think it's very relevant for the maritime world. One of our main KPIs is availability and reliability. And that's exactly what Claire is talking about when he says we cannot afford to have a ship stop in the middle of a sea. So that DNA of making sure the machines is always available and is running when you need it, it's a key element that we can bring into the world.
Okay, let's talk about ports and bunkering. And I know that at one point China was going to sell some of their ports, or the Chinese company was going to sell some of their ports. The Chinese government stepped in and said, well, let's rethink this. So it's a big political football. And how quick are they to respond? You know, if I have a hydrogen ammonia, let's just say yet, but a hydrogen ammonia engine and I dock in Senegal, how is that? That's an extreme example. You'll have to forgive me on that. But how does that play into all of this?
It's critical to work with ports. Because so I was involved in setting up the first LNG bunkering, and it was absolutely critical that we worked with ports on the protocols, the safety standards, the mechanism of how that new fuel would be bunkered, and the safety procedures related to that. So ports are absolutely critical as part of the development of new fueling value chains.
Do they operate in I mean, is there a standard in this, or does every port and every country have different regulations? Is there any standardization? I know there is on, you know, when a ship comes in, there, you know, has to meet certain regulations, so you can't dock. But the ports themselves, is that homogeneous when you talk to these people, or do you have to pick them port by port?
There are some ports that are seen as that are leaders, and so often you will have a port that will. There are ports working on green corridors. They're an integral part of some of the green corridors that are developing. Essentially the bunker infrastructure on particular routes to enable vessels to be able to bunker at both ends of their voyage. So ports are already participating, but obviously there are some ports who are perhaps more well positioned to take part in those projects than others, and therefore they lead, and then others can then piggyback on.
The way we see it 10 years from now, right? Is there's going to be a limited number of real big mega hubs with all sort of bunkering opportunities there, right? It needs a lot in terms of infrastructure to get there.
Cost, yes.
Yes, and then, you know, in most of the, you know, medium and small port, you will not have, you know, all the opportunities.
Sophistication, yeah.
And so, of course, there's going to be these green corridors that, you know, we'll have. And all that means that actually this is also related to what I was saying at the beginning about kind of clustering a little bit this. So this will influence the itineraries, where you can go and bunker, and so on. In terms of regulations, yeah, they still, it's not, you know, a scenario in which we would say that it's homogeneous everywhere. I mean, we've got safety rules that are kind of common, okay? But a lot of this is...
Safety is easy to, and our industry all across Baker Hughes have always really focused on safety. And safety at any cost is done. Once you get past safety, though, it's dollars in return.
Yeah, that's the point, right? And in some countries, and this is where, you know, you've got to connect this to political, geopolitical aspects. In some ports, you know, you are actually set up already today to be very fast in becoming one of those multi-fuels commodities. You've got infrastructure in which you can bring whatever. Think about cold ironing, right? In some of our ports, this, you know, it's a no-brainer. You can have a lot of power there. But in many others, if you don't have the infrastructure behind the port, it will be much more difficult. And so, of course, in some countries where at the state level, you kind of have money enough to provide, to give this, is guaranteed. In many other countries will not be guaranteed. And so, and I will just add one thing that Claire said at the beginning. It's a transition, right? So in the next...
You're reshaping the industry.
Yes, and in the next 25 years to 2050, some of the fuels that we'll have will be transition fuels. And so it's going to be an evolution that will get us eventually to the net zero.
If I may add one thing, I mean, that's where flexibility comes back into play. I mean, infrastructure, you cannot duplicate it very quickly.
That's right.
So you're going to have the green corridors. If we do it right, it's probably going to cover 70 to 80% of the maritime movement of people and materials. And then you got the smaller ports. That's where the flexibility is quite important. So that basically you can decouple the shift from the specific route. If you have a possibility to, you know, to change fuel depending on the port that you're going, then you have solved the problem, at least for the interim period.
And so, what are my three most sophisticated ports in the world today? People watching this are going, ports, harbors, you know, they know their marina down. But from a location point of view.
I'll put Singapore.
Okay.
Singapore is the number one, in my opinion.
Providoring paradise. I was in Australia and got water in my fuel on my ship that I was running. And so I had to get 16 pistons, liners, and rings from Caterpillar. And I called all the Caterpillar dealerships, and they said it'll take 2 weeks. I called Singapore, they had them the next day. So
you would agree with me?
Yes, absolutely. What's my next two?
I think in terms of, if we look at ports that are the largest ports in the world and those that are on corridors where probably, to your point on clustering, that will probably go first, then probably you would look at the kind of ARA, Rotterdam, Antwerp, Amsterdam area. You would look at probably one of the ports in the Middle East from a bunkering perspective, Singapore, and then maybe Shanghai, and possibly Los Angeles, Long Beach. And with that, you cover a very large part of the global container
That's my
trade.
green corridor.
I agree.
That then those vessels, because they are deployed on relatively fixed routes, you don't need a massive bunkering infrastructure to be able to support their transition to different fuels. Whereas if you're talking tankers particularly, they trade all over the world, and anything that restricts where they can bunker brings inefficiency into their trading, which comes back to the point that you made just now, Raimondo, that it is all about flexibility for those vessels that need to be able to trade globally.
Because a lot of the people watching this will go, oh, that's great. What ports? You guys live it every day, so you know. But that's interesting, and I do agree with Singapore. It's an amazing place. So we've talked about different fuels. We talked about a little bit about decarbonization. You mentioned direct air capture on board boats.
Not on board boats. I was talking about it on land. Where
on land.
Good. There are a range of pathways to zero, and obviously we've talked about ammonia and hydrogen, which are very clear pathways. Ammonia is already produced and shipped globally. There's already a demand for it as a cargo, particularly for fertilizers. Mm-hmm. Direct air capture is in the context of if we're moving towards synthetic fuels with a carbon neutral or carbon negative, then direct air capture is one potential way, but the energy cost of that at the moment is incredibly high, and it's not certain
but it's just an
whether
offset.
that would mature.
But it's just an offset? Okay.
Well, it doesn't act directly on any specific device, be a ship or an airplane. It's a totally different approach now.
I remember when Delta said that they were going to be net zero by 2050 by planting a gazillion trees. And everybody decided, that's not a good enough offset because you're cutting down mature trees and planting young ones. And it got that nuanced.
Well, that brings the discussion about availability of some of these fuels, right? Mm-hmm. That's another big topic. And, the maritime world is not the only sector that needs these fuels. It's in competition with, airplanes, it's a competition with road transportation. So production will have a huge increase of any of these fuels, in the next 5 to 10 years. But competition is there. And so the ability, somebody established that the whole maritime sector will need, in this transition period of 30 to 40%, of what is believed to be the production of a mix of those fuels, in the next 5 or 10 years. But the ability to appropriate that 30 or 40%, in competition with SAFs and so on, it's to be seen.
California has noticed that with only a couple of refineries selling them gasoline, and they make money while their gasoline is about $1 or $2 a gallon more expensive than it is where I'm in Texas.
And that's where the benefit of being able to blend based on availability will be critical from an operational point of view for the ship.
I agree, and
but
that's
also
why
the fuels that we end up having available as shipping will also partly depend on what other sectors demand.
Right.
So we've always in shipping used as a fuel what we've carried as a cargo, and that has created the infrastructure globally that we can piggyback on for our fueling infrastructure.
Okay.
So the reason we've been able to, as an industry, develop LNG as a fuel is because it's already demanded as a cargo by power generation, etc. So if we see, say, ammonia being demanded by power generation, or obviously it's already used in agriculture, then that creates the backbone of an infrastructure that we can piggyback on. If that then creates the baseload demand for the production of the green versions or blue versions of those fuels, then it could be that at the margin there's some for shipping to use. But I agree with what Carlo said. There is going to be, unless the production significantly ramps up, there is going to be a challenge over availability. And that's where we come back to energy efficiency. That the more energy efficient that we can make the industry, all industries, then the less of that fuel that we are going to need to use.
Yeah, let's not forget one thing. The IEA said it in a study 6 years ago. If you look at the Paris Agreement and how you can achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement, 1/3 comes from efficiency improvements. So it is the unsung hero is efficiency can do a lot to reduce carbon intensity.
It has been amazing to see how efficiency has become the most critical issue for most companies in everything they do. For a long time it was operational execution, and now doing a good job isn't good enough. Doing an efficient job is what's critical. And I like the idea of whatever you don't use as a fuel, you sell when you when you land. We have an ice cream brand in the States, and the pitch is we eat all we can and sell the rest. So that's you can adapt that for the industry. Hydrogen.
Yes.
Hydrogen back 23 years ago was going to be the next big thing, and then nothing happened for 22 years. Now it's coming back. The cheapest way to make hydrogen is from natural gas. So the oil and gas industry is just fine with the use of hydrogen. But we've had hydrogen embrittlement in offshore structures and all. Isn't using hydrogen a heck of a challenge considering the existing infrastructure? Or is it only going to be, as a blended fuel, it makes a lot of sense. But hydrogen on its own, is that practical?
Well, like everything new, there are technology challenges that need to be overcome, and this one of embrittlement is very well known, and we know how to tackle it. It takes investment and time. Now, we can look at it from a very pragmatic point of view. You can blend it, and most existing infrastructure will be able to take up to 20% blend, plus minus, depending who you ask and what type of device you're looking at. But you can blend it. However, the flip side is 20% blend does not get you much CO2 reduction.
That's right.
Unfortunately, the chemistry does not work in linear way in this case. So 20% blend gives about 8% CO2 reduction. So you really need to push on the blending side up to 80 to 100% if you want to have a considerable CO2 reduction. Again, the embrittlement is something that can be solved with materials, with coatings, with inspection technologies, and so forth. So we don't see it as a hurdle. It's something that needs to be addressed. The real challenge of hydrogen today is the cost side.
How so?
Well, if you look at how, depending where you are and which technology you use, today you can probably make a kilo of hydrogen between $4 and $8 per kilo. The smart approach, and you mentioned one thing, you mentioned that made from natural gas, it's cheaper. I would challenge that statement for a very simple reason, because the cost side depends on many variables. It depends on where you are, which technology you use, and where you use it. So if you, for example, make hydrogen in an area where the cost of electricity is very low, and you don't have much of transportation costs, so you use it in that area, then green hydrogen is very convenient. Typical example is China. In the north of China, they have flooded the mountains with wind turbines. So they have very, very cheap electricity there. We have testimonies and studies that show that in those localities, hydrogen is self-sustainable. They don't need any governmental support to use hydrogen, especially for mobility applications.
So electrolyze the natural gas, electricity.
You make it cheap, you use it where you make it cheap, it's actually sustainable. The pathway to get to use it, to globalize it, is very, very long. But let's not forget, if you look at history, to build the gas value chain, it took decades. It took decades to get to the cost base of today. It will take time, but eventually we'll get there.
And Middle East, Raimondo, probably as well, right?
Middle East is fantastic from a cost-based point of view. You will have to transport it, though.
Yeah, of course. Let me make one point here on materials, right? Because this is another area where we are going to benefit a lot from the last 20 or 30 years of research on materials. There's no question that repurposing a lot of the infrastructure, it is, a challenge. There's a lot going on that, and actually you need, particularly on the transportation side, which is big infrastructure, you need full-scale testing and so on. So it's money and it's a little bit of time, but this is going on, and it has been going on in the last few years. And so I agree with Raimondo that these are all topics that are being solved from a technological standpoint, requiring a lot of development and requiring a lot of collaboration across the industry. And this is the other point. I think collaboration here across the value chain, it's going to be the key to shorten the time to get that done.
We talked a little bit before we sat up here on collaboration about how the oil industry has gotten much better at it, but only because the major oil companies decided they didn't want to pay for labs anymore. Who are we collaborating between? In an ideal world for you, and I agree with collaboration makes everything work better. Who are the collaborators? Who am I working with? Before it would be major oil companies and service companies, and that. In shipping, what would it be?
Well, when I talk collaboration, not necessarily you're talking about, you made an example before about, the major of the oil and gas collaborating among themselves. Mm-hmm. Here we're talking about vertically on the whole value chain. Okay. Not necessarily, within competitors. Okay. Which is always a very tricky area, right? Given, concerns, yes. And so what really you need to connect is the value chain overall from, so in the maritime means connecting, the ship owners, operators, port infrastructure, who's running the port, operators, and actually users, final users. And so the whole thing, right?
That's a huge and global supply chain.
But it's going to be key. It's going to be key. What we're trying in our world, the way we think we can help this industry is by setting up, for example, big hubs in which we can help some of the developments in kind of real scale. So I'm talking about going from TRL 4 to TRL 8 or 9.
What's TRL?
TRL, technology readiness level, in the development of some of this in an integrated way. And I think a lot of the failures on the development of components, or processes, fail in that demonstration, at that demonstration level. So talking about hydrogen, for example, now we are building in one of our open innovation hubs, a steel mill, heart of 8 industry, and here we're talking about the energy equation these couple of days, right? Mm-hmm. Connecting, the energy side to the industrial side. Here we're talking about, heart of 8 industry, the steel industry. We are building a steel mill that, basically will produce steel from hydrogen, okay? And this actually, we fired for the first time this plant in close to home, months ago. And this is just an example how we are collaborating, and we pull together the industry, in that case, the steel industry. But behind that, there's all sort of research on materials that will be suitable for that, or processes, but those become platforms for all the players in the supply chain to come and test solutions.
Okay. And in terms of deployment in shipping, obviously we can have the technical collaboration that delivers the product that can be deployed. But then exactly as Carlo describes, you need the technology developers to work with the builders, or they can be the same thing in Hanwha's case. But then you need the ship owner who's going to own that asset to work with the cargo owner, who is essentially the one who has to pay for that asset, which could then bring in an end user. Certainly in the container sector, when we see that it's the companies like Microsoft, who were here yesterday talking about their green transition. It brings the whole value chain together to then deploy that new technology. Because even if we bring the economics to a parity, there's still exploration in terms of deployment together, and that's where you need that collaboration on specific deployment routes where you can build that bunkering infrastructure, which then brings in the ports as part of that collaboration.
I understand why you're talking the super hubs, if you would. That makes it a whole lot easier to do, because instead of doing it at 500 ports, you do it at a much more limited number.
You can't do it at 500 ports.
Oh, I know. Exactly. Believe me, I understand.
Because the cost of building, even if we have, we're building a new fuel that's based on storage infrastructure that already exists in a port, just building that last mile from that storage to the vessel, there's quite a cost involved in that. And obviously we need to make this work from an economic perspective for everybody in the value chain. So yeah, those hubs where you get a base load demand that you can then piggyback on that to make the bunkering value chain as part of the overall chain, to make that work financially is absolutely critical.
more on collaboration. Maybe we can talk till tomorrow morning about collaboration. But we have identified that as a fundamental element for the industry a few years back, and it starts with few fundamental points. One is that there needs to be an understanding that the problem is too big to be solved by anybody individually.
Right.
So there needs to be that realization that together we are better. Second element is that the parties need to recognize there is an economic advantage to do it. There needs to be a de-risking factor that can come, for example, by complementary competencies that you put together. But most importantly, you need to have a similar company culture that you can work together. Very often we forget about that element, and you need to build that trustworthy relationship. And have the mindset that it's not a pie that we divide and whoever is smarter is going to get the biggest piece of the pie. That by working together, we're going to make the pie bigger. Those are fundamental things. And I take just an example because we have representatives here. We are working Hanwha, we're working with RINA. We have alignment in what we want to tackle and how we want to tackle it. There are some language barriers sometimes with our Korean friends, but the reality is we think in a very similar way. And we do see the advantage of combining our competencies, especially for us that are new in the maritime. And we need to compensate for that. So we have one of the biggest players in the industry, which is helping us understand how to do things in the world. And we've filled the gap then with RINA, which has been in the business for actually centuries.
160 plus years.
Exactly.
Wow.
So that's the way we look at, we're creating a small ecosystem that brings all those elements to make a collaboration successful.
Well, I am a giant fan of culture. As an analyst, you can't put culture on a spreadsheet. And so a lot of times culture got missed by people who had only been financial analysts. Having actually had a real job once or twice before, culture is critical. And if you're going to collaborate with somebody who doesn't share your culture, the collaboration will fail every time. So that is critical. I'm glad you brought that up. The other thing is the three of you represent, I think is this a rarity, or are there other groups like the three of you working together on the same thing? Are you leaders? Are there 5 of these, collaboration groups?
There's a reason why today we say that we are rewriting the energy equation. And to me, the essence of that is that we are getting really good and identifying those areas, the parties that we can collaborate to do something good for the planet. So that's part of the essence of rewriting the energy equation, which is the main theme of this event.
And it's the same for Hanwha, which I think comes back to the similarity of culture. Hanwha wants to lead in the energy transition through the development and deployment of new technologies, and obviously this collaboration is one of those ways that we can deliver that.
And from my standpoint, just saying RINA was, founded in 1861 as a ship classification registry, right? So that's that's most of what we've been doing for 140 years. But in the last 20 years or so, we developed, a specific competences and knowledge in the whole energy and energy transition. So from the most, traditional energy sectors to the most, advanced in the energy transition. And so now in the last few years, projects like this, and we have several around the world, are the ideal opportunities to fertilize, to cross-fertilize our knowledge. So, not necessarily a ship classification registry has that depth, the competence coming from the energy side. So what we are trying to do is pulling together those competences, but not closed in a room at RINA, but working with the industry, from operators, ship owners, in this case, energy developers, shipyards, and so on, to help, again, on that side, and that means speeding up and going in the right direction. So, and rewriting the energy equation, the way when I listen to this, it is the key, but it requires you to have, let me say, a right to left thinking, right? Really
practical and creative.
Exactly, and then being able with that vision, to just design the journey to get there and understand how you better do that, through collaboration with the ecosystem.
It's interesting. I'm listening to all this and know the capabilities of your respective companies, which is why I asked the question: Are there groups like this? And I was thinking that there probably can't be, or at least very many of them at all. Your involvement, the fact that Hanwha is putting you in charge and going so into technology, which you've always done, but focusing on it, and something I won't say new for Baker Hughes, but you've been doing turbines and all, but a new market for what you do. I don't see how a port person or an end user person would benefit at this point being a part of the three of you. I don't mean to be rude and exclude people, but I don't see I would see that they argue for their own self-interest. And we always do.
It depends on the point you are in the development and deployment chain. Obviously,
you'll eventually have to get to them.
Even in working in this kind of collaboration, obviously one thing we bring as an industrials conglomerate is we bring the end user's view.
Yeah, that's true.
Because we can't develop a technology that we can't then deploy.
Yeah.
So even if they're not involved in the technology development, there's obviously an understanding of their needs and requirements in the collaboration. So we talked earlier about the fact this technology, the gas turbine, is based on technology that is already deployed. That is thinking about the risk appetite of the people who are going to use it and the ability of ports to accept the fact that this will be bunkered. So even if they're not involved in this stage of the collaboration, a lot of collaborations will start like this with trust, like-minded culture of companies coming together, and then we'll expand at different phases when it's appropriate.
It eventually has to include everybody in the value chain, I understand. I just think that your nucleus is interesting.
You've got to bring in parties who want to move forward in the same direction, exactly as Raimondo said.
Yeah, and let me add one point here, because probably wouldn't even be right if we end any kind of discussion today without speaking about data or big data or what we do with data, right?
I was going to get there. Go.
Okay,
no,
so
go,
I
go,
can wait.
go.
I can wait, Jim.
No.
But I think it does tie into this discussion, because talking about collaboration at a high level, okay, but what does really that mean in terms of what kind of actually data we share? And this very often, and again, we are trying to facilitate a lot of this in many different parts of the world. We are everywhere. We need to be everywhere. Sometimes really the barriers are when you start sharing data, and if you don't, you are slowing down really the development of any kind of
industry-wide.
Yeah, absolutely. And sharing data, and some of this is really, a lot of that is really cultural, right? Am I losing something? And a lot of the ability today and what you can do with data, in terms, again, efficiencies, not efficiency of the gas turbine, but efficiency of the whole, process. Think about, maintenance. Think about even talking about the maritime shifting. When we are bringing a gas turbine on a ship, we also bringing, a different culture on, the life cycle of the assets, of operation and maintenance.
Repair schedule, everything.
Yeah, repair schedule. We are talking about, bringing in a condition-based kind of approach, which is a modern approach that we absolutely need versus. So all of that, we are bringing predictive, okay? We are bringing a lot of AI on board. A lot of that is what we do for living, actually helping, with intelligence on the ship. All that requires a lot of sharing of the data. So this is still one of the biggest challenge that at least we are seeing in many of these collaborations, that still you need to break that concept that this is my data. Well, with those data, if you let us have those data, you're actually going to be better off, in what you are achieving in the next couple of years.
It's a concept we were talking before. You share the data, you can make the pie bigger.
Yeah.
If you do that, this is my data, and as long as I keep it for myself, have an advantage, it's not going to work.
And when we're thinking about deploying new technologies, we need to be able to share data on the performance to be able to improve that performance.
Absolutely.
Historically, in the past, a ship was delivered from the shipyard and the shipyard said, goodbye. But now, as a shipyard, we've moved very much into that digital platforms on board vessels to assist crews with better managing the operational performance. But then, when we can have that agreement with the owner, it means we can improve the design of the vessel based on the operating profile. And that will be critical when we come to deploy new engine technologies and we want to operate more efficiently. We need to be able to marry the operational performance with the design of the ship to be able to really enhance the energy efficiency.
Exactly.
And I was going to ask about the use of AI in your respective businesses and will, but to your point, an AI agent with incomplete data is completely ineffective.
Yeah, of course.
So if I have half the data available and the other half of the people who have the data won't share it, then whatever I do in my snazzy new AI model is going to be limited. Where is AI being used by Baker in your particular area?
Well, we're introducing AI progressively, but also, let's say, carefully, being something relatively new, especially for a very conservative company like Baker Hughes. One thing that, I'm a dinosaur, so I belong to the generation that saw the first computer at age 23. So I struggle to follow how quickly the youngsters are moving in this space. And when I need something on my iPhone, I go to my 15-year-old daughter because she can figure it out.
Absolutely.
And I can't. So to this, a small digression, there is a phenomenal free course of Harvard University on AI that I recommend anybody to look at because it teaches the fundamental of how AI works. So today we're basically applying AI in multiple areas, from helping us quote generation, so automatizing the, let's say, repeatable processes. That's the fastest way to introduce it. But we're also progressively introducing it into plant management activities. So we have digital tools that help optimizing plant operation. So that's where we are massively introducing AI because it can really help improve efficiency of every plant.
And the predictive maintenance, which we've been using for years, which was before the term AI was actually thrown out there, it was machine learning. Yeah. But we've been doing this for a while. In
a long while.
Remy, what's
for a long while. So I was going to make that point, Jim. So the machine learning, has been there for a long while, and we've been using that on, when we deal with the life cycle typically and the operation and maintenance side, that has been embedded in the, including in the maritime sector. We've got our ERP system on thousands of ships around the world, and we started embedding, the predictive side of that since a long time. That's machine learning. What we are most talking, of course, today is the large language model, is the Gen AI, right? And on that side, at RINA, we basically set up what we call our AI factory approximately 1.5 years ago, and that's where we develop in phygital, like physical and virtual rooms. Basically, let me simplify, kind of apps, right? Mm-hmm. So we identified 39 key services that we provide to our customers in the business that are suitable to be basically digitally enabled. And we develop solutions embedding AI in those, so we digitize services that have not been, which brings us back, to the concept about efficiency.
Well, I was going to say that's what it does.
Yes, absolutely. So we are pushing hard on that, and then a separate story that is more recent at RINA is that when we design our long-term plan, we are already talking about a hybrid workforce. So that brings the point about agentic, yes. And that has been started more recently. But when we look into our 2030 scenario, that's already embedded, and so it's we are going that direction for sure. And we've got a team that is basically developing, creating, building agents as we speak.
It's a fabulous efficiency tool if used correctly. Hanwha?
So Hanwha similarly is using it to improve production efficiency in particularly our shipyard, but also there's a very large application in design and particularly that cycle of getting the operational data into the design process and really enhancing the energy efficiency of the vessels that we build through using that data. One thing we do need to make sure of when we are making ships particularly more data enabled is that we are taking burden off the crew, we are not adding burden to the crew. So when we're thinking about how do we use AI on board, then we're thinking of it, well actually how do we relieve pressure on the crew on board rather than add extra work to them, which also in an industry where we have a seafarer shortage, making ships more connected in a way that is positive for seafarers, hopefully will also make seafaring a more attractive career to the younger generation who want to be more digitally connected.
Yes. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been educational, I know, for me, and I'm sure for everybody else who's tuned in. Can't thank you enough. I appreciate it. This is another episode of Energy Espresso. And thank you guys very much for the education. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.